Hello and welcome to Unleashed, the show that explores how to thrive as an independent professional. I'm your host, Will Bachman, and I'm here today with one of my closest friends, Rudra Chatterjee, who is joining us from India. Rudra, welcome to the show.
Hi, Will. Great to see you.
So, Rudra, there's so many different things I thought we could talk about today. But maybe just to give people a little bit of an overview of what you have going on professionally, maybe just introduce yourself. Tell us about the different businesses you're involved in.
Sure. So, Will, as you know, the two different businesses, completely separate. One is in growing tea. My family's been growing tea for over 100 years. And we have tea estates in India and in Rwanda. We have been growing tea in some of the best regions, what I think are the best regions of producing tea, Darjeeling, Assam, and in high altitude in Rwanda. And the other business is in manufacturing carpets, which mostly handmade. And associated with the carpet business is also a furniture business, which is a new business. So these are two different businesses. The tea business is called Lakshmi Tea, and the carpet business is called OBT.
Okay, and we'll include links to those in the show notes. So I just wanted to get people a sense. So you have a couple family businesses going on. I want to start with, and you also, we should mention, you also teach, right? You teach, you write periodically, and tell us about those two aspects of what you have going on.
Yeah, so I've ever since we were in Columbia together, I've enjoyed teaching. I had a taste of being a teaching assistant, and then I became an adjunct professor in International Management Institute in Calcutta, in India, and also a guest faculty in Indian Institute of Management, IIM Calcutta. And it has some relevance to the things I see at work, but it also keeps me, the fun part is the fact that I get to hear what the students are saying about the problems I face. So it's in some ways great advice from people who would be either colleagues or customers. In terms of writing, is a little more on I write in newspapers, Telegraph, Statesman. These are newspapers in India, and there's no period. It's usually something to do with economy, to do with after the budget is announced or some significant economic policy is announced. I try to write, marrying my interests in history and business, and that's what I enjoy doing.
Great. Now, you have always struck me like, I like to read, but I don't read like 10% of the amount that you do. I don't think I've ever mentioned a book to you and you haven't told me, oh yeah, I just read that, or I've read that a couple of years ago. Tell me a little bit about your reading interests and the types of books you like to read, and maybe how you decide what to read next.
So it's funny that you say that, Will, because I never read as a kid. And I started reading only when I was in where I am now, in Mirzapur, and I didn't have any friends. And there was this big library right next to where I lived. And it was the only way I could spend my time other than, at work. So I, by necessity, didn't have the choice of books. I read what was available. It's not like the New York Public Library. It's got a few books. So I read what I got. And I still think of reading books a little like meeting people. And when you meet a person, you engage with them and you find a lot of things that are interesting about them. I don't necessarily read the books that have got number one ranking in newspaper or rating or from very famous authors. I miss the browsing experience these days, but in the past it would be going into a library and just going through, spending an hour. That was as interesting as reading a book was. It was just spending the time looking through different books, reading a couple of pages, and thinking of the times when it was written. But mostly it's nonfiction, mostly somehow related to either economics or current affairs or history. And within that is most of my reading. You were asking about I'm reading a book called The New Map by Danielle Yergin. It's a book which Danielle Yergin has written a lot of books on energy. He's written The Prize and The Quest, and this is a book that came out in September. I don't know. Amazon recommended to be read, and I started reading it. I'm enjoying it. But there's also a lot of books I've been reading during this period where we are all stuck at home during the COVID times, on how we reacted to the plague in India, how we reacted to the avian flu in 1918. So just the context of how things are so similar during our age and the age then. So it's more out of interest, but my interest tends to be more history or economics.
What are some of the top books that you've read recently that you would recommend?
So I've been going through a lot of books. The great pandemic, which is 100 years ago, written, I think, 20 years ago. There's a books by Neil Ferguson on the empire. And I read a recent book which it talks about the 1918 flu and the impact it had on the tea industry, called The Empire of Tea. So it's quite all over the place, but those are the books I've read recently.
Now, you've also been organizing some talks recently with some pretty well-known economists, some sort of virtual events. Tell us a little bit about those talks that you've been organizing.
So when the world shut down in March, I thought one positive is that I would be able to reach out to people who I wanted to have conversations with, and it's easier to do it now. Like we are speaking, I'm in Mirzapur and you're in your farm. So I reached out first, I think early April, to Abhijit Banerjee and Esther Duflo, the Nobel Prize winners in 2019 in economics. And we've done work with them in our carpet company, talking about how to engage more women in the workforce and coming up with processes where absenteeism can be reduced. So we wanted to speak with them in general about the tools that they have used. And both Esther Duflo and Abhijit Banerjee, it was just very early during the COVID days. We talked about the Indian economy. We talked about COVID. Next, we did an event with the head of Moody's for US and India, William Foster, to talk about the credit rating impact after this kind of a shock. And that was interesting, and a lot of curiosity among both banks and business people. I did an event with Joseph Stiglitz, who was a professor in Columbia, and he spoke about inequality and the challenges, about governance in different countries. Last event was, I had worked my first job, so to speak, was with outside my family was with Muhammad Yunus in Grameen Bank, a short internship. So he spoke to us about social business, and he made a huge impact uh, to our business because of the huge number of people who work in tea and in home furnishings. And I thought it would be a good time when so many people are challenged in terms of jobs in India, for business leaders in India to hear Muhammad Yunus speak about how to run a social business, how to engage and create um, productive opportunities for a lot more people. So those were some of the events. Actually, I've had a lot of events over the last few months, because it's just like, it's so much fun. And anyone who agrees, I love doing these conversations on what's happening um, to the world and how do we react. I think we are in a completely different world in many ways, and hearing many perspectives is great.
You mentioned kind of the social aspect of running a business. I know that at OBT, that you've taken quite a number of initiatives in terms of environmental protection and taking care of the workers that go well beyond the requirements that the government, in terms of what well beyond government regulations. Could you talk about that a little bit? In terms of some of the investments you've made and what drove you to do that?
Absolutely. So OBT, um, you know, is a company which is in the middle of a rural area in a very populated part of India, Uttar Pradesh, very close to Varanasi, and both creating opportunities for the thousands of weavers, A, to ensure that they have their children have good education, creating good schools which are helping um, their families get a opportunity that they didn't get, and also creating uh, a safe working condition um, in the village, where the law and order situation can sometimes not be very good. So having very good, safe working places, creating an environment where the people don't have to travel far, creating a well-lit place, through road through which they walk from their village home to where they come to work, and having a process which uses as little water and as little energy as possible have been the focus. And the reason these have been focus is, I think, in a company like OBT, which is within the villages of India, having a strong community um, impact makes us a stronger company, especially over the long term. I've always felt that we have two sets of customers. One is in the villages where we give work, and for them to choose OBT over anyone else, and for customers to buy our products. The second is obvious, having good designs, having good marketing, having good prices. That's more, what we are always most of the time we speak about that. But for example, when in late March everything shut down, the first thing OBT did was get good packets of food, which will look after a family for 1 month, distributed to more than 2,000 families. And we had colleagues in OBT wearing masks, but driving through the villages, handing it out. I think over years, when people in the villages see that OBT is standing up to be counted, bringing jobs, bringing education, making sure that the environment is safe, we are the preferred choice for these people when they want to work. And that gives us a very easy growth opportunity, because we need workers to grow. And this is a labor intensive business. So that's something that I think, all of us at OBT would love to do irrespective of the business consequences, but I think there is a business case as well. And also, I think it's, when you're talking about what the government requires us to do, I think it's certainly we've tried to stay ahead of that, not because the state mandates us, but we feel that this is something that engages our colleagues. A lot of companies believe in paying a big bonus after a good year. I think along with a good bonus, if you can do some things that they feel proud of their company having done, and they feel that they've contributed, which they have, by going and distributing the food during COVID times, and seeing that the schools are running well. Um, that creates as much engagement in the company as monetary benefits. And I think the same is true for Lakshmi. When there was a big issue of migrants in India coming from one part of India to another, and we created their clubs in all these tea estates, and the clubs to for migrants to come and stay in the clubs, and then only if they're tested and they found to be you know COVID negative, they come into the tea estate. But till then, they can stay. They can, as long as they're not uh, you know, meeting people, they can, stay there, eat food, and if they're not well, if they are found COVID positive, go to the hospital. And so that was a way to ensure that the minimum number of people got the infection in the tea estates.
Mm.
In Rwanda, where we have 3 tea estates, we first, told people that they don't have to come to work. They'll get, paid even if they don't show up in the beginning, because that was a worry. And we made a contribution to the local charities and the government who were actually doing all the work. So I think this has been something, um, you know, every year you have different requirements as a citizen, as a corporate citizen. This was a big year. You needed to do more than other years, because this was one of those years that we will always remember. Hopefully, it'll be 1 year, but it was one of those years that we would be remembering many years later. Did we do a good job? Did we play our role? And I think I'm glad that both OBT and Lakshmi were participants during this process.
I know that there's been, some concerns on some parts about the use of child labor in the production of carpets. Tell me about the steps that OBT has taken to, make sure that there's no, child labor being involved in the production of carpets.
So the employing children is illegal, and so having a process to ensure that there's no children in the weaving sheds is something that is done every 3 days in OBT. We know whenever someone is weaving, who are the members in their family. We ensure that they're in school or away from the workplace during the work hours. And we have a very strong process, which the ILO called as it was referred to as the gold standard, that this was 20 years ago. The process has been good and the process is working. I think from the legal point of view of ensuring that children don't work, we are fine. The issue is more needs to be done. And it was because of that that we contributed to opening of schools by Project Mala, who opened 5 schools where children who are from the weaving families get educated. It's not enough to have the negative thing that no child should work, but what are they doing during the time that they're not working? What skills are they learning? So that they, get a good job, hopefully as an executive in OBT or, anywhere else. We've also been working for the last 5 years with a very good organization called Pratham for primary school education. And the quality of education that is being given is better. And I think parents also it's taken a while because the reason child labor exists is a purely economic reason, because people are very poor and they can't easily make ends meet. So if you can give good jobs to the adults, I don't think they would push their children to work, and especially if there's a good education opportunity. So I think all of these have to be done. Have a strong law so that whatever might be the reason which we may understand, you can't have a child. Second, have a good environment for schooling. And thirdly, make sure that the parents are getting good jobs. Make sure the parents are getting good salaries so that they can look after their families. So all three of those are key. And OBT's been, this is much before my time that OBT took these decisions and has played a pioneering role in eliminating child labor from the industry.
When you and I were in business school together, I might have had slightly stronger Excel skills, but I recall that you were a few years younger than me. I guess you still are, but it seemed to me that you were much more mature and wiser in your business judgment. And there was many cases where you would share a perspective, and I think it must have come from being in a family business and being kind of at your father's side, and kind of growing up in that environment. Talk to me some about some of the lessons you learned from your father as you were growing up about how to manage a family-owned business.
So firstly, you were much better at most things than me, than Excel. Excel was one of those things, especially, I came into a completely unknown world of business school. And thanks to your guidance, I picked up a lot of business school skills during my time in Columbia. But I do certainly feel that my business training was started at a very young age uh, by my father and my grandfather. My grandfather had started our company more than 100 years ago. And he had to leave his home, which is now in Bangladesh, and set up business again in India in a very challenging environment. And my father took that business, which was a small business run by my grandfather, who was also a freedom fighter who fought against the British during to win us. He was part of the independence movement. So business wasn't the only thing he was engaged in, but my father grew the business tremendously. And in those days, with one telephone in our house, one landline, and very difficult to get a connection, there were times when I would pick up the phone and actually do the business deal, because if I didn't, there would be no more deal. There was it wasn't like you could. So there would be someone who's offering something at some price, and my father would say that if he offers this price, agree to it. The phone will probably get disconnected if you don't do it. So we were very curious, and we also realized that it is a tough job to earn a return. The world that I grew up in the 1980s, it was the license Raj in India. It was very difficult to set up a business, very difficult to buy a car, get a telephone connection. And it was a huge struggle that I saw my father go through. But the beauty was that every evening, a lot of people say we shouldn't talk about work at the dinner table. That was never followed by us. We were always talking about what happened and how things didn't work out. And so I think a lot of people, when they grow up in the business, they just grow up in an environment which is almost like a vacuum. And they come into business like they're doing any job, but it's not. The fact is, it is an entity in the tea business. We didn't have a stake in OBT at that time. The tea business was an entity that I saw, how things, whether it was the good market versus a crashing market the next year, high cost, bad weather. You could see issues with wages, with new laws and how things would change. So those were things that we would imbibe on a regular basis, and the lessons were essentially that you have to have a good plan, a good strategy of why your business should succeed. Most businesses don't succeed, and B, you have to be very nimble and humble running a business, because things keep changing. And this is I think a great year for all of us, not just kids growing up, but all of us to see how this can be from just the year before. And the what seemed completely like a great business sometimes seems like a very you know challenged environment. And so that was something that we grew up learning. And I think I took some of that to the business school. And I took some of that to my consulting job after business school, when I would see that, group of very well-intentioned consultants would be suggesting something completely crazy, according to me, to the client, because it looks good on paper. But it is not a robust plan, and it can go wrong, and it can kill a good business.
Yeah.
And so I was, I was more conscious of, that this is not something that needs to be optimized necessarily all the time. You have to run it for longevity. That's what I felt I brought.
Can you think of any particular examples of consulting recommendations that that didn't kind of jive with your own kind of personal experience having been in business?
Sure, there was a few of them. There was a time we were in a company which was making robotics, and there were poor returns in the sensor and some of the parts of the tools that the company was engaged in. And in all the waterfall and all the charts, it was just looking like a terrible business. And and it was like this Excel, which is a fantastic tool, but people were just cutting out the 10 most unprofitable segments and showing a much better return if you had just not done these 10 businesses. And that's, it was quite obvious that, robotics is something that might be valuable in the future, and that's why the company is doing it. But it was a lot of attention, and negative attention was that, okay, you should be doing robotics, but you haven't been very efficient at that and stuff like that. But in some cases, you are not supposed to be very efficient on something that you don't really know what the future is going to look like. You have to have a broad plan of going after this segment. And this company finally did very well because they had invested in that segment, having the sensors and robotics. But during the whole project, there was a lot of attention, not on, okay, how can we make this into an even bigger opportunity in robotics? But okay, you are losing a lot of money, your experience is negative. Maybe we should, be a little more focused on how we are investing. And maybe we should not, people wouldn't say cut it off, but they say, let's be a little smart about how we are spending the money. Well, that's not the way I looked at it. And even in my business, I've seen, in a furniture project, in the first 2-3 years, the business was much worse than what would be expected. Because when you're getting into a business, you never know, whether you know what the customer wants. You'll be doing a lot of wrong sampling. You probably do the wrong product and all of that. It was much worse. And a lot of the guidance from independent directors, board members were, okay, let's do this in a small way. It's almost like you want to have fun with this segment, do it, but don't spend a lot of money. But you have to say that this is probably going to be, if you've thought through it, this is probably going to be something that you have to put the money aside and forget about it. Don't think about the returns. Give it 5 years. If you've lost the money, that's what you have to be prepared to do it. And that was not the way in general I saw consulting. I loved consulting. I still have a lot of positives out of my experience, but I think sometimes consultants are led by data instead of using data to in a more nuanced way.
Let's talk about caste for a minute. There's a new book out. You may have read it called Caste that talks about race in America and caste in India. Tell us your perspective on how things are, the current situation in India, and how you see that situation evolving.
I've bought the book. I've brought it to Mirzapur, and I think there's it's the first time I saw a book which actually takes the Black experience in the United States and the caste experience in India and puts it in one book. I think Ambedkar, the founder of the drafter of our constitution, the main drafter of our constitution, spoke at some points he spoke and combined those two experiences. But this is the first time. I'll speak about caste in India and the challenge that it has had to development. Firstly, I see no redeeming feature of the caste system in India. And it's been probably the most long-term and most damaging feature of India, where finding a structure which has been so resilient and robust and has existed for thousands of years and been it's something that was there in 2000 years ago, still relevant in newspaper advertisements when people are and I'm sure, although I've been now married for many years, so I wouldn't know, but I'm sure even on apps when you're looking to date or something like that, it's something that's just lasted. And the reason is because it's a hierarchy, so it reinforces one caste is it's kept down by the one higher caste, and even within each caste there are segments, and so there is the experience of caste is something that when I was being having grown up in Calcutta, having grown to an elite school, I didn't see it as much as I did when I got into work and I went into villages and I saw how ingrained it was. It has, just like anything which is like racism or, sexism, because it is not based on reality. It runs in a peculiar way, and you can't come up with a good set of reasons why it should be removed. There's no reason why it should be there at all, but there are too many players who have lived off it for too long for it to be given up.
What are some of the ways that it frustrates progress or impedes you as a business person in terms of hiring people, promoting people, or the just sort of the challenges that come along with the system?
Just when you have caste, it's an absence of merit, and that no business runs well when there's an absence of merit. And you get focused on castes, you focused on which part of the country you're from, which language you speak. That is a challenge. And it's been a challenge. And I think India wouldn't have, and it's probably a dramatic thing to say, but I don't think India would have been colonized for as long if it hadn't been for caste. When Indians fought for their freedom, used to be one part of India fighting for the freedom, because many other parts, they couldn't combine themselves effectively as one unit. I think that's true in India, and I know there's at least strong recognition across, government, across political parties, across many parts of society, that it is something that needs to go, but it is pernicious in its own way, and it. I think the best sunlight is great education. The best disinfectant of caste is bringing good schools and making sure children are sitting together and learning and getting jobs, because they are no longer identified by their caste, but by their degrees or by their skills. But it's not, uh, it holds it, the country is held back because of it. And it's not easy to resolve it. I think the opportunities of our country, or any part of our country which gets out of the caste, identity to identity of merit, is huge.
Tell me a bit about the current situation of COVID in India. How has the government responded, how businesses responded, and what's happening today with COVID in India?
I think the government responded very early and very strongly. Uh, I've obviously lived many years in US, and I was quite alarmed at the discussion on whether wearing masks is a good idea, or uh, is it a flu that will go away. That was the kind of commentary from the highest levels of US government. That didn't happen in India. India, locked down very strongly, very early, um, 26th March. And that lockdown was originally supposed to be for 15 days, then it got extended a few times. And we were in total lockdown till early May. The challenge was not the seriousness with which it was taken. The challenge is that India has a massive informal economy. And it is impossible, like for companies like ours, we continued to pay all wages through the COVID days. But the people who don't have a job in the first place, or are making goods and selling goods, or cooking food and selling food on the roadside, for them, there has to be more help coming their way. And that is a big challenge. I don't know um, what would have been the best way to put money in their hands without having that pre-existing system. Maybe they needed to, we basically got stuck in a bad way as a very highly populated poor country with a very high informal network. I think companies did more than their share. I think just like at OBT, we realized that this is a great opportunity. Many companies did more than their share, but many companies really struggled. Now, many companies themselves were running out of cash, and you know, uh, banks were pressurizing them to pay back when they didn't have the money. So there were many issues that it was in some ways a perfect storm, and the number in India was high, but I think the testing must have been reasonably good, although the newspaper said that the testing rates were not very good. But I feel testing must have been reasonably good, because the fatality rate is probably the lowest in the world, which usually, there's nothing else that I can say why is the fatality rate so low. It's probably because more people were tested to have COVID. And that's why the numbers are low. It looks like now that the numbers are, it had gone up to 98,000 was the highest number of COVID cases in one day. It's now down to around 50. But there's no vaccine anywhere else in the world. So it might go back up, because people now realize that they have to wear masks, but they have to continue earning money, and it's a huge challenge. To meet both the two concerns, right? The whether you will die of COVID and whether you will die of hunger. And in a poor country like India, it's never an easy, it's never easy to take that call for any state. I hope that we will have a vaccine soon, but the second challenge would be, how do you distribute a vaccine to 1.4 billion people? Apparently, some of these vaccines need to be transported in cold temperatures. So if the vaccine were to come out in, say, March next year, when the summer is about to start, how do you manage that? And it's a huge challenge. My only hope is, these have been India's biggest weaknesses. Like you were talking about caste. One thing is, everybody realizes that, this is something that is impacting all of us together, and we need to have systems as a country, irrespective of our caste or gender or what language we speak, or rich or poor. We need good systems in our country, good logistics, good healthcare, and vaccine programs, good technology, so that we can work even when we are not at office. So there would be some positives coming out of it, but right now we are in midst of dealing with a very bad crisis.
Well, Rudra, I think we're coming to the end here. I know you have to hop into some meetings. For people that wanted to follow up and learn more about the books you're reading, or your companies that you run, where's the best place for people to go to find out more about what you have going on?
So, our company websites for the companies. I have a website that I just write my news. I put my newspaper articles and any video interactions with the professors you spoke about. I post it on rudrachatterjee.com. So it's you can always go and see what I've written, or if I've done any interviews. I haven't actually put up anything on books, because I am happy to, if you want me to, but I haven't done that as yet. But in terms of what I've written and any of the conversations I've had on video, they're up on rudrachatterjee.com.
Fantastic. Well, we will include that link in the show notes. And I would love if you have some time at some point to start tracking the books that you read. I'd love to follow your recommendations, maybe on Goodreads or something. But we'll include those links in the show notes. Rudra, it's been such a pleasure having you on the show. Thanks for joining today.
Thank you so much, Will. Be well.